Excuse my gross coffee. It's quite delicious. So, I wanted to talk about living in a big city versus living in a smaller city. So, I have a friend who lives in New York. She's very young. She's in her early to mid 20s, and she went to school with me. She was an undergrad when I was a grad student, and she recently moved to New York, and I'm really proud of her. She's going to auditions and taking dance classes and doing all the good stuff, and I'm so proud of her. I don't know how she does it, because when I lived in San Francisco, or actually I lived in Oakland, across the bay, across the bridge from San Francisco, I could never afford to live there. I always had extra help from my father. If he hadn't helped me, I probably would have had to move home, or I would have had to work all the time, which I didn't want to do because I wanted to go to auditions and have time to work on my character and memorize lines and all that other good stuff. So, sorry, my shirt is like a complete mess. I don't know how I survived, because I survived on so little. I probably made $1,000, and then my father gave me $1,000, so I probably lived on $2,000 a month. My rent for the first 3 years was $400, and it went up to $850 by the time I left. It never went over $850, which is actually really cheap. And I lived really close to everything. I lived about a half an hour train ride or BART ride from the city. I wasn't like an hour away from the city. So it was actually, considering, it was actually pretty affordable. I pay much more now. I pay like double what I paid, particularly what I paid in Hattiesburg. I paid $600 for my apartment, or my dad paid $600 for my apartment in Hattiesburg, and I pay $1,200 now, which winds up being about $1,500 for everything, including internet and electricity and bills. So this is the most I've ever paid for rent, which is surprising because, you would think that living in the Bay Area would have paid so much more. But living in a city can be very inconvenient. It's not easy to get around. You have to walk everywhere. You have to bike everywhere. You have to take the train, the bus. I took the bus everywhere in the second 2 years that I was living in the Bay Area, and I walked everywhere, and I took my bike everywhere, and my bike was constantly stolen. Parts of it were stolen. The entire thing was stolen. So getting around is really difficult. I'm not saying any of these things to discourage anyone from living in a big city, because I do think it's really important for people who have like just graduated from college, especially if they went in state, to venture out and go and live in a big city. I think that what you should do, this is just my opinion, but I think that what you should do is go to school in state, get a scholarship, do really well in school, and don't go into debt. Don't go out of state for school. Don't go to a really fancy school, because you'll wind up going into debt, especially if you want to study theater or acting or singing or dancing or writing or film, or art. It's not recommended to go to a fancy school, because you're going to wind up in debt, and you'll probably never pay it off. Most people who go into debt for school to study theater or art or acting or whatever never pay it back. I have a cousin who's $100,000 in debt, and he will never ever pay it back. This is a combination of undergrad and grad school, and I think it was very stupid of this person to do that, because he's never going to pay it back. Whereas I went to undergrad for basically nothing. My parents had $40,000 saved for me for college, and I knew that if I wanted to get a degree within reason, then I would have to go in state, and I didn't want to. I did not want to go in state, believe me. I did not want to go in state, but I did. Because I was smart enough to realize that if I didn't go in state, that I was going to go into huge amounts of debt. You know, even if I'd gone to like Belmont or Vanderbilt, Belmont and Vanderbilt are hundreds of thousands of dollars. They have really good programs, but you wind up being in debt, and I wasn't willing to be in debt. You know, when I finished college, I thought that I was going to move to New York and be famous within a year. Of course, that never happened. I've always struggled with my career and with success. I've always been kind of lost in my life. But big cities are dangerous. The big cities are very, very dangerous. When I was in New York for Christmas, the week before Christmas, I was on the subway, and I came home and I heard the news that an illegal immigrant had burnt a homeless lady alive in the subway. She had fallen asleep on the subway, and he lit her on fire, and she burnt alive. And nobody tried to help her. People were taking videos of her dying and screaming and burning alive, and even cops passed. I think even cops passed her by and didn't help her. So I will never be going on the New York subway again. I will always take Ubers or something else. But I never had any trouble in Oakland. I never had any trouble. I was never mugged. I was never, no one ever like catcalled me. That's on purpose because I never wore anything revealing. I wore stuff like this that's very oversized, and see, this is a very this is a large, so it's not going to show me off. But if you live in New York City, it can get very, very cold and very, very hot, and you're walking everywhere. So, it takes, usually artists have to live an hour away from the city, even an hour and a half to 2 hours away from the city. So, if you want to go to auditions, you have to commute. And commuting on the subway is very difficult. It can get very hot. It can get very cold. There was one time when I was living in New York in 2019 over the summer with my sister and her husband. And I went down to the subway and it was like 150 degrees. It was so hot. They didn't have any air conditioning down there. And I waited down there for like an hour for the subway to come. So it takes a long time to get where you need to go. And New Yorkers will see an hour commute as actually very short. If I were to commute an hour every day to get into the city, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't even go into the city. It's too far. Like I said, I live 20 minutes from Nashville, so that's very easy. And I'm in my car. I can listen to whatever music I want to at full blast. I have my privacy. I can drive as fast or as slow as I want to. I don't have to, I don't stop my car every 5 minutes to pick somebody else up. It's just me. If I want to go to the grocery store, I can just drive down the street. If I lived in Oakland, I would have to walk, and then I have to carry all my groceries. Big cities are very competitive. They're competitive for jobs. They're competitive for housing. They're competitive for auditions. Sometimes you can't even get into an audition because after the auditions open, they are immediately closed because hundreds of people want to audition for that company. So you have to be like really, really, really on top of things if you want to audition for a big company. I always auditioned for smaller companies that weren't known like at all, so I always got pretty lucky. I think I was in like 10 or 15 shows when I was out in California, which was a lot for me. That was over the course of 5 years. And sometimes I would be in a show, that show would close, and the next day I'd have rehearsals for the next show. The most I was ever paid was $400 for a show that was for like 10 shows and a 2-month rehearsal period. So it was really nothing, but back then that was my rent. So it was a lot to me. But the nice thing about living in big cities is that there's a lot of weird, avant-garde, interesting, bizarre theater, which I love. There's no theater like that here in Nashville. It's a lot of family-friendly bullshit, which I don't like. I was in Oliver. I was in the ensemble of Oliver 2 summers ago, and I had a terrible time. It was very painful for me, physically painful for me, because I'm so out of shape, and I just didn't enjoy myself, and I wish that I dropped out because it wasn't worth it. But it didn't bring me any kind of joy. But I was in a ton of really great shows. I was in 3 shows with one company. I got to play a boy. I got my second leading role that I'd ever had in my whole life, in this really weird avant-garde piece by Václav Havel. It's called The Garden Party. And I got to play a boy who was obsessed with chess and was trying to enter a bureaucracy. It was a whole play making fun of your bureaucracy, and there were a whole bunch of non sequiturs. And when I first did the first read through, I was like, how the fuck am I going to memorize these lines? Because they don't make any sense. They don't like follow, when somebody has a conversation, they don't follow a logical path. They're like all over the place. But I did, and I wound up memorizing my lines faster than anybody else in the company. That usually was the case because I had a lot of time in my hands, and I made sure to memorize my lines as quickly as I could, because I'm not good at cold reading, and I wanted to get off book as fast as I could. But anyway, living in the Bay Area was wonderful. I have a lot of wonderful memories from there. I don't really remember any of the bad things that happened to me, and really nothing bad happened to me when I was out there. It was just hard. It was cold. It was competitive. When you were looking for housing, you'd have to be on Craigslist every day, all day long. And if a new post came up, you had to be the first person to message them, because the first person would get the room. And then you would have to go see them like literally right away, because somebody else could go see them. Housing was a huge difficulty out in the Bay Area. For me, it was very hard to find good housing with sensible, kind, good people who weren't completely crazy. A lot of the people that I lived with out there were completely nuts. But I got to go to physical theater school. There's nothing like that here. There's no mime or clown schools in Nashville. I'd love to start one. There's a bunch of clowns out there. There's a bunch of acrobats and circus performers out in the Bay Area. There's a lot of great theater out there, even though I've heard that a lot of the theaters are closing, which is too bad. But the California Shakespeare Theater closed after like 50, 60 years of being in function, which is too bad, because I used to work there I worked there as an usher and as a fundraiser. And I got to see all the shows for free, which was really fun. And I have a wonderful memory of the very first summer that I moved out there in 2011. I lived with my friend Jamie Stobie, my mom's friend Jamie Stobie, who I was named after. And I found out that Cal Shakes was doing Titus Andronicus, which is my favorite Shakespeare play of all time. And we drove out there from San Francisco, had a picnic, and then we saw the play, and it was amazing. And James Carpenter was in it. He played Titus, and Stacey Ross played Tamara. Stacey Ross and James Carpenter are two pretty well-known actors in the Bay Area. I don't know if either of them are still working, but they worked at ACT, they worked at Aurora, they worked at Berkeley Rep. So I got to brush shoulders with a lot of really well-known people, like Ron Campbell, who was in Cirque du Soleil he's a clown, he was in Cirque du Soleil in Japan, and that's how I met his wife, his much younger wife. And I got to take classes with him. I met him through the San Francisco Speakeasy. He was the MC in the cabaret where I worked. This was an immersive theater show, and there were like 5 different rooms, and I just happened to work in the cabaret. I was the spotlight operator. And I got the job, and the lady was like, it's okay if you don't really know what you're doing. We'd love to teach you. And I was like, that sounds spectacular. They were like, just so long as you're willing to learn. And I was like, I'm definitely willing to learn. Because I wasn't really an electrician at all. I was just an actor who just loved theater. There's a lot of really interesting theater out there, out in California and in Chicago and in, New York. So that's something that I really miss about the Bay Area. I miss all the weird theater out there. Because there's nothing like that here. And if I wanted that kind of stuff to be here, I would have to start it. But I can't really walk or stand for long periods of time anymore. I was in New York and I literally walked 2 minutes and I was in so much pain. I think it's from all the weight that I've gained. And when I was in my 20s, when I was in my early, mid, and late 20s, I could walk without problem. I used to walk all the time. I would walk for hours, and I had no problem with it. And so I'm glad that I lived in a big city when I did, because I couldn't anymore. I couldn't do it. I'd have to take a taxi or an Uber everywhere, and that would wind up costing me thousands of dollars. I wouldn't be able to walk. So I'm really glad that I lived in a big city and did all the things that I did when I did it. I'm glad that I went to grad school when I did, because I couldn't go now because it causes me so much pain to move my body, to be on my feet for extended periods of time. And, I can't do it anymore. Unless I was to somehow miraculously lose a bunch of weight, then maybe, but I don't know if that'll ever happen. But anyway, yeah, I would recommend that if you're in your early 20s and you just graduated from college and you don't have any debt, move to a big city. It's hard, but it's worth it. You'll learn a lot about yourself. You'll learn about what you like and what you don't like. You'll get to explore yourself and the city and learn more about yourself. I would recommend doing this stuff when you're young, when you still can, because when you get older, you won't be able to anymore. That's all my advice for today. Take this all with a grain of salt, because this is just my opinion. But I do have a lot of experience in living in a big city, so, I do know what I'm talking about, but, it's just my opinion. Love you.